Well, hey guys, welcome back to Hope Rescue Podcast. We missed you. We hope you missed us. We had a little spring break like everybody else.
You know, the spring break has been only ruined by rain.
Well, we've had pockets of sunshine. Today
Yeah.
is one of those days, but this is how much spring has sprung at our house. This morning, I'm looking out our kitchen window into our backyard, and I saw two bunnies. Come on.
Oh.
That's the good stuff right there.
Post-Easter bunnies.
The bunnies are hanging out in the
Is that
grass.
what we're having for dinner?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Maybe if we were,
No,
maybe
in
a different
Wyoming.
day and a different time.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a great Easter break. We hope you had a great Easter break and had an amazing
Well, it was
Easter.
a little longer than an Easter break, so it was a spring break. We
Okay,
had a little
spring break, like everybody,
so
all the
like you
kids out
started,
there. Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
we're glad to be back. We missed you, and we're jumping into a great new series. I told Tim I'm so excited about this one. It's about relationships, and why don't you go ahead and tell them where we're going to start and where we're going to end
So
up.
what we're talking about is hard things to say. We did a series of messages at our churches about hard sayings, or I can't, hard words, I think it was
words,
called.
yeah.
But these are hard things to say in the context of a marriage, romantic relationship, with your kids,
Work
with your parents, with your work.
relationships.
So in a relationship, hard things to say will relate it a lot to marriage, but it will apply beyond that.
Right.
And so we've come up with 6. You could probably come up with 100,
Yeah.
but we're just going to do 6 because we're not allowed too much time. But the first one is, I'm sorry.
That's where we're starting today.
Yeah, that's going to be today. Then we're going to talk about tell me more, and we'll explain what that means. No is another hard thing to say. I love you. We say it all the time to each other, but why is that a hard thing to say? We'll talk about that. And I need help. That's a hard thing
Yeah.
for, I don't know about women, but especially men.
For women too, yeah.
Yeah, for everybody. And then thank you.
Yeah.
All of those are really important to say.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you're perfect, then you never have to say,
Right.
I'm sorry. Never have to say it. So the hard things to say are all of these.
Yeah, we're going to jump into I'm sorry. Whoo, that's a big one. And there's a great passage that comes out of James 5:16, and it's simplified. This is what it says. Confess your faults to one another. So obviously in Scripture, we're directed that it's a healthy and good thing to confess your faults to one another.
Yeah.
But that doesn't not have like brackets around it. Like there is a right way to do that and a
Yeah.
wrong way to do that.
Yeah. Well, let's take an example. I hesitate to say, but I'm going to go ahead and say, because this is not even a Christian cult. It's a different kind of cult. It's a sociological, psychological cult called Scientology. And in Scientology, you confess your faults and then they use them to be used against you. There was another one. What was that one where they got the little branded? They branded themselves.
It's one of the common denominators
Yeah.
of cults is that they actually keep track of your journals and
Yeah.
your self-confessions. And at some point, if you try to leave or, you know, they don't like what you're doing.
They've got you.
They've got you. Yeah. So a lot of people in fear stay stuck in that.
So-
That's not what we're talking about.
Yeah. So if you confess to somebody that's untrustworthy,
Right.
that could be one of the biggest mistakes of your life. What is James saying when what Kimberly read for us, confess your faults to one another? So I just want to deal briefly about who the other person is. And I think you need wisdom about that.
Yes.
You know, who can you confess to? And why do you confess to them? How do you confess to them? We're going to talk about all of that in this episode. But things about that other person that I think need to be kept in mind. First of all, the other is not the whole church congregation. So it's probably unwise to get up in front of the whole congregation and confess your biggest
Or
failure.
Facebook or Instagram.
Or Facebook. Yeah, that's absolutely social media. Another big mistake.
Right.
Because it's out there in public. But in a congregation, you know, we think we're safe there, but the reality is you may not want to share that. There may be somebody that can't handle it there.
Right. And it's about their sensibilities too. Obviously, depending on what it is what information you want to deliver. In our past, I would say like religious examples of how we were raised and maybe in generations before them, they used to drag someone up to the front of the church that had some kind of moral sin or whatever and make them proclaim in front of a church that had no idea, that just, this wide open exposure and shame process, which is not God's heart, and expose it to everybody, the visitor coming on a Sunday, those who are like maybe, struggling with some of the same kind of thing. If you were to watch that and you were struggling with the same sin in your life, you would never come forward, because it's not safe to be thrown in front of everybody and the shame that you experience afterwards. That's not what we're talking about.
Or it could be a stumbling block to somebody that hears it.
Yeah.
So the second thing is about confessing to one another, the other person. The confession should never be made to an unsafe person.
And that's what's key. Unsafe people in your life.
Yeah, obviously we need to share with each other and so forth. But when I talk about somebody that's unsafe to share a private failure with, number one, they can't handle it. Mm-hmm. They just simply cannot deal with you with your flaws. If you go to somebody like that, you're going to ruin your relationship with them. The second thing is they can't keep a confidence. So if they can't keep a confidence and you've shared your private failure, that's going to come out and other people are going to know, and it's not going to resolve the problem. Right. It's going to increase shame.
Right.
Shame always involves social interaction, whether real or perceived. So be careful that you don't confess your faults to unsafe people.
Right.
And the third one is this. This is not to replace confession to God.
That's where it should start.
Yeah. You got to start with coming before God. There's real catharsis, and we're going to talk about that. There's real catharsis in confession. Mm-hmm. And you may feel better, but it may not be helpful. Mm-hmm. And there is great catharsis is coming to God, a God who can handle it, who can keep your failures and deal with you in a loving, fair way, and that God will not reject you. Right. And there is catharsis in that. That's the beauty of prayer.
Shame. He doesn't bring shame. That's the beauty of that too. And that's where it should always start. Right. Start with your conversation with God in your confessing your faults first to Him, and then begin finding the safe places to be able to process with people that you trust.
Right. So we're talking about the hard thing to say is, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Right?
And there's this quote, I don't even know who said this, but it's
unknown source.
An unknown source. Apologies aren't meant to change the past. They are meant to change the future. In other words, an apology, and it is valuable. It's invaluable, actually. It's important, but it doesn't necessarily change the past, right? What it does is create a path to a future and having a healthier relationship.
Yeah, I think that what that does too is if you're trying to change the past, it didn't change the past, and you've addressed the past, but you're looking for a better future. So if you're trying to change the past, your motive may be skewed in your apology, when in reality, you should be looking forward to a better future.
Right.
And Benjamin Franklin, I don't quote him very often. Actually, I just read this in, getting ready for this series on apologies. Never ruin an apology with an excuse.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
Because I don't know, I'm sure everybody.
I do it all the time.
Everybody who has been in this listening audience has had someone apologize, but then qualify it with their reason why it happened. And it just undermines the apology, to try to make a list of excuses. And not that some of those couldn't necessarily be valid, but oh my gosh, it can totally destroy the whole point. Yeah,
there's something about somebody telling their past history that kind of mitigates or maybe gives reason behind their bad behavior. But when you're apologizing to someone you've offended, that's not the time to do that.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, because what it does, it takes away the sting of the apology on your part, and it makes them feel like, well, I have no reason to be outraged by your bad behavior.
Right. And we personally have been involved in facilitating opportunities for people to communicate apologies for past offenses. We've been facilitator to bring two different groups, families, couples, groups together. And we've seen personally the mistake made of launching first into the reasons why I am the way I am, why I've done what I've done, and then go into the apology afterwards. And I know probably the heart behind it is to help, the ones that are offended better understand why they shouldn't personalize the bad behavior. However, what it ends up doing is undermining the impact of the actual apology when it does come, because it feels like it removes the weight of responsibility from the offender.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important to not go into that territory, to launch first with the apology and then tell your story afterwards if you feel like you should. But really, like, staying away from that altogether is probably the best route to take.
Yeah, I think I've done it myself where, you're having a hard time at work. And so, you're a little on edge with your family. And, that may be the reason you're on edge, but it doesn't excuse the bad behavior. So if it's used as an excuse, that's a real big problem.
Right. And it just, whether it's real or perceived, it makes it feel like you're not fully owning up to what you did.
Yeah.
And so that's what's important to remember. And then let's see, where are we? I got lost on my tangents. So why is apologizing so hard? The first is pride. That's obvious. Like, we all battle that. Not wanting to
Don't want to admit you're wrong.
We don't want to lose face. We don't want to have to be the one to acknowledge that we screwed up, And pride is, Scripture talks a lot about pride and how it's not of God. So anytime you feel that rising up in you, when you have an opportunity to apologize and you want to not because of it, immediately shut it down and say, look, this is not part of, shouldn't be part of this process. I need to put that side of my flesh and my humanity down and suck it up. The second reason why
let me say something about the pride issue. So have you ever been in a conversation with someone, and about halfway through the conversation, I've mentioned this before, about halfway through the conversation, you realize you're wrong and they're right? And it's it takes humility to admit, you know what, I'm wrong. And pride is such a devastating, negative emotion.
Yeah.
And you have to set that aside and go, you know what, I was wrong. So
for the sake of the relationship. Yeah, that's good. Number 2 is fear. Sometimes we're afraid to apologize because we don't know what their response or reaction is going to be. We don't know how we're going to be perceived by apologizing and owning up. There's fear of what the relationship will look like on the other side of actually apologizing and acknowledging something.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of reasons why we struggle with fear. But again, it shouldn't be the reason why we don't do it. And this is a really big one. Number 3 is shame avoidance. And shame will drive us to the darkest places of our life if we allow it. And to be honest with you, Satan uses shame in our lives more than any other tool that I know of. And fear and shame are so connected, aren't they?
Yeah.
But shame is a huge stumbling block to keep us from bridging in relationships. Shame is not of God. That also is from the pit of hell, because it keeps us locked in bondage to mistakes and failures, and we're kept in these secret places of our hearts and our minds, and we're in bondage to the past when we could be freed with an apology. And so it's a terrible tool. So you have to get past the fear of having shame behind, the freedom of bringing it to light. And that's really the point is an apology brings to light in a place where you can experience the giving and receiving of forgiveness when you're willing to acknowledge it.
Think about if you have residual shame. That is, you've done something in the past for which you feel shame. It's unresolved, and so the shame kind of is underneath. And then something else on top of that, and then another thing on top of that. And so you've compiled a bunch of shame that you've not resolved. That creates this residual effect of shame. And so when something happens for for which you need to apologize, you're unwilling to do it because the shame is going to surface. And it's not even shame for that one thing, it's shame over everything else. Right. That's the insidious nature of shame, is that it really doesn't have intelligence attached to it. Point. It's just negative emotion. So there's a few other reasons why apologizing is hard. Number 4, accountability avoidance. So not only shame avoidance, but accountability avoidance. And Kimberly, you had mentioned something about, you're afraid of what it's going to look like on the other side. If I apologize, what's going to happen on the other side?
Yeah.
Well, we do need to take accountability. Part of apology is to say, I'm willing to take whatever comes from this, and I'm willing to earn my trust back, my relationship trust back with you. I've kind of backed off of my trust capital, and I need to reinvigorate that and re-earn that capital of trust. So that's a lot of the reasons why we don't want to apologize. Number 5 is the loss of power. So here's a mistake that we believe that if I apologize, I'm losing myself in this transaction, and I become less than the other person.
Yeah.
I make mistakes. Kimberly makes mistakes, and one of us makes more mistakes than the other.
Depending on the day.
Okay, thank you. I do. I will admit I make some mistakes.
I make mistakes every day.
Yeah, you sure do. Anyway, it's about time for an apology right here on the air. Anyway, but you don't want to be less than the other person. You want mutuality. You want equality. But just the fact that you apologize does not make you less than that person.
Right.
And in some ways, it even brings back respect.
Oh my gosh, every way.
Yeah, because something's underlying is wrong.
Right.
Number 6, loss of control. If I apologize, I will not be in control. So that stubbornness to say, I'm not going to let go of this.
Right.
Yes, I did speak to you in an inappropriate way, and I was harsh, or I was unkind, or I was moody, or I didn't talk to you about this purchase ahead of time. Which we both.
Well, we're putting that
do.
on the list.
No, that's both of us need to do that.
Sorry, Tim.
Sorry. But that wasn't a jab at Kimberly, by the way. But somebody else in the room. Wait.
The doggies don't have access to Amazon.
Right. They sure don't. But the control of, this and the stubbornness and this unwillingness to let go and say I was wrong. And then finally, number 7 is lack of care for the offended party. One of the reasons we don't apologize is because we don't respect and care enough and love enough the other person, which we'll talk about at the close of this in just a moment.
So there are known offenses and there are unknown offenses. And I think it's important that we talk about that when we apologize for an unknown offense, like maybe they didn't even know about it.
Like, describe, what do you mean?
Well, let's say you've done something to somebody, and they maybe, or you've done something yourself, and you're kind of offloading your guilty conscience to somebody.
Yeah. You doesn't even know about
They don't even know about it. Yeah. You may actually create a space for them to create an offense in their life towards you. So you have to be careful. You have to be measured.
Yeah. If I gossip about somebody, I've harmed them, I do need to go to them, even if they don't know, because it's affecting other people's view. I need to at least go to the person I gossip to and say, I'm sorry, I said this about Jill.
Let's talk about that for a second, because I'm curious, because we've had experiences in the past in church leadership where people will come to me and say, or to you, I just want to say I'm really sorry because I've actually really not liked you for a long time because you said something.
That's different.
Yeah. So, okay.
So if I feel negativity towards somebody, and maybe I'm kind of hurt, maybe I'm jealous, or maybe I just don't like them, or maybe, I think they're weird or whatever. And then I go out of my way to apologize to that person. They have no idea.
You're creating
all of
an
a
offense.
sudden, I've ruined the relationship, and that person didn't even know. What we should do is we should apologize for known offenses, and then we should take those apologies. Like if I feel badly about somebody, or if I feel whatever, judgmental of somebody, I need to take that to the Lord.
There we go.
And not go to that person, because then I've now breached the relationship and harmed somebody that had no offense.
Yeah, so that's why I was
what we're
asking,
talking
because
about.
with the gossip thing, like they come to you say, "Listen, I'm sorry, I've been gossiping about you for the last year," and you're like, "Well, now I'm offended."
Yeah, and if the only reason you would go to somebody, let's just take person A.
Yeah.
And person A is a friend of mine, but I think badly about them. Person B, I go to person B and I badmouth person A. Now, I have to go to person B and say, you know what, I was wrong badmouthing person A. Am I confusing everybody with the A's? But anyway, the point being that I need to go to them. Now, what if B had told other people and now it's out there and people have a false view of person A?
Yeah.
I may need to, not always, but I may need to go to person A and go, listen, I have harmed your reputation by saying bad things about you, and I want to apologize.
Yeah.
That's different than saying, I think he's weird, and I'm going to go tell him I think he's weird, and I'm really sorry. I've had people come to me in churches and go, I don't like your preaching, and I just felt like I should tell you that. Okay, what am I supposed to do with that?
Well, I'm going to go home and cry.
Yeah, there's not much I can do with that. In fact, that has happened recently.
Yeah.
So anyway,
any leader knows they are a target of that kind of that approach, which is interesting. So what about apologies without change? This is interesting too in some of those situations where we have negotiated or facilitated apologies between two different opposing sides, over an offense.
Yeah.
And we've actually gone into some of those situations, prepping the parties, saying, look, if possible, release your expectation of what this will look like on the other side of the apology.
Yeah.
Go into this with an open heart and a heart to bring forgiveness to yourself as well as to the other person. Stay in this moment. However, when there's people who apologize and don't change, you got to know that they're not to be trusted until the pattern of bad behavior changes as well. So don't make the apology necessarily about the long-term outcome. Be aware that the long-term outcome may change, and that may change the direction of your relationship, and probably will. But go into the actual offense and apology willing to, like I said earlier, give forgiveness and receive forgiveness for yourself. Because when we live with unforgiveness, it actually is a bitter pill that brings destruction to our own soul.
So here's one of the misconceptions about forgiving someone. Forgiveness does not mean reconciliation.
That's
Those
right.
are not the same
break
thing.
it down.
So one of the things, if somebody apologizes to you and they just keep apologizing, but they don't change, and let's say they're a toxic person, abusive, whatever, and you say, okay, thank you for your apology, but they continue to do the bad behavior, reconciling with somebody who's abusive or toxic is a mistake. That's not what releasing somebody. You can release somebody and still not have a relationship with them.
Yeah.
And it is important for your heart to release people, forgive people, and move on. But you may move on without them.
Correct.
And that's, I think,
and you
really
release
important.
them to their choices and the consequences of their choices. The consequences are not something you can or should rescue them from if they're negative. But the benefit is if they actually follow through. The fallout of that is potentially maintaining that relationship and actually getting into a better place. But you do need to release it.
Yeah, hard things to say. It's hard to say I'm sorry.
Yes.
But if you don't mean it, sometimes it doesn't matter. Yeah. You can say it. It's not hard to say, I'm sorry. And really, I'm sorry. Like you'll hear people say, I'm sorry you were hurt. That's not an apology.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. What did you do that you're apologizing for, be clear. Apologizing for something you didn't do is a mistake. We have so much stuff to share on
we
this.
don't have enough
Way
time
too
on
much
this
time.
episode.
But like, just for example, if I apologize for something I didn't do, I may encourage bad behavior. Let's say I'm in a relationship with somebody, and in that relationship, they are being reckless or mean or unkind. And so I apologize for provoking them when in fact I did not provoke them. That person was just mean, unkind, or whatever. That's just going to keep them continuing in bad behavior.
Right.
So don't apologize for what you don't have. But let's kind of close this off.
The last three essentials to an apology.
yeah.
So first, you want to state the offense without qualification. And I'm just
Boy, that's hard to do.
That's like everything right there. You don't even describe
I'm
what that
sorry,
means.
and the reason I did it is because
Well, it goes back to our
my
first-
wife is mad at me, and or my boss is mean to me.
So
or-
that always keep that in mind.
Yeah.
That you're going to go into it stating the offense, owning it, and not qualifying why you did it.
Yeah.
And number two is take responsibility for your actions without accusation. Very difficult to do. I did it because you is usually where we go.
That's start and fill in the blank.
And
because
so
you're a jerk.
so you got to remember to take responsibility for your part and don't be pointing fingers back. It takes away from it. And then the third is have a clear plan for change.
Boy, that's
and
important.
that is the most important thing is to how can I leave from this conversation where forgiveness was given and received and have a plan to rebuild that relationship and be intentional about it.
So apologies are really important. Real, genuine, heartfelt, loving, reconciliation producing apologies are absolutely crucial in relationships because we all make mistakes.
Yeah.
And it's hard to do it. And it's hard to do it right. So we've given you some tools there that maybe you can use. Next week, we're going to talk about, we were talking about hard things to say, and Kimberly came up with this one, and it is tell me more. In other words,
good listener.
Being a good listener. Do you know how it feels when somebody says, tell me more? Well, we're going to talk about that next week. I hope you'll join us on this new series, Hard Things to Say. Part 2 next week, how to listen well. So thanks for listening to Hope Rescue Podcast. We are, if you may be there already listening to this, but if you have a friend, invite them to hoperescuepodcast.org, hoperescuepodcast.org. All of our podcasts over the last several years are there, and they can see those archives, listen to those. So have a great week. We'll see you next time on Hope Rescue.
Podcast.
Podcast.
Bye, guys.
Bye. See ya.